All right, I am thrilled to be joined on the line today by another beat writer who covered the Chicago Bulls in Michael Jordan's heyday, mostly that first dynasty, a little bit of the crazy that happened afterwards, the retirement and the comeback. Melissa Isaacson is on the line today. Melissa, welcome. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on. And I have to say, it was definitely a lot of fun. Like watching this Last Dance, we first saw you pop up in the series in episodes 5 and 6. So, what was your experience like participating in this documentary?
Yeah, in Chicago, we had been hearing about this kind of inklings of it for a couple years. And frankly, I thought it would be cool, but I'm not sure I was as excited as everyone else at first, just thinking, it'll be fun. And I was there and, I'll know what's going on. And then clearly the momentum was building, and I saw how incredibly thorough and thoughtful they were, the filmmakers, and putting it together and being interviewed myself. And as it got closer and closer, the anticipation was building so much. And then when they moved it up, I was just, so excited like everyone else. And I've been glued to the set like everyone else as well. So I've really, really, enjoyed the whole process.
Yeah, as watching this sort of brought back some of the memories of your time covering the team and seeing like these stories being played out 25, 30 years later.
Yeah, they really have. I've been joking to friends and family that I wish they would interview me now because now it's all come rushing back to me and my memories are much more vivid. And when they interviewed me a year ago, April, I remember really being uncharacteristically like very nervous because I felt like I couldn't remember very much. And so I felt like I was a little sort of hesitant in those interviews because it was tough. I mean, it was a long time ago and there were some details they were asking me, and I just, it just wasn't all coming back to me like I'd hoped it would. And then, now I've been talking about it enough and reading stories and hearing others and watching the documentary, and now I feel like it was yesterday. So, it's been fun, but I wish I was a little more. I wish I was a little more plugged in a year ago. I think it would have been a better interview today.
Yeah, it definitely could be possible because obviously it's all coming back now. And speaking of things coming back, do you remember the first time you actually met Michael Jordan?
Well, it's funny you should ask the one question I can't answer because I did think about that because, you know, I've seen people quoted saying that, like how excited they were. And the only thing I could think of is that, I mean, one, I was young, but I wasn't a baby. I was 28. I'd worked in Florida. I covered Florida State. I had covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'd been around the world. I covered Wimbledon. I did stuff. So maybe I wasn't quite as loud, but I also was very, very nervous about taking over from Sam Smith, who was the beat writer the year before. So I think the combination of sort of being somewhat of a veteran, but also being nervous and just wanting to make sure that I, was on the job doing absolutely everything that I possibly could, that I think I didn't have time to really be, I just had to act like I had been there before. And if there was some, you know, really funny or dramatic first meeting, I just don't remember. And I don't think there was, or else I would have remembered. He was always very nice to me, and I still have a good relationship whenever I see him or talk to him, which isn't often, but, I've always really been fond of Michael.
Yeah, and we saw some of the key moments in the first three-peat last week on The Last Dance. We saw the infamous shrug when he decides he has to basically embarrass Clyde Drexler on in the game one of the '92 finals. Like, what was the reaction like in the ring when you see him make the 6-3 and he goes over and shrugs in Magic Johnson's direction?
Oh, I very much remember exactly where I was sitting, and when he kind of half turned and shrugged towards the scores table, I was on the baseline, and remembered it vividly, and it was just too good to be true. And that's, as a writer, that's how it was every night. Honest to God, it's, if he wasn't doing something incredible on the court that you could write about, there was the color surrounding those games and all of their, they were just characters, and the dramatic fashion in which they won games and in which he performed. And so when he shrugged, it's like, as a sports writer, you're like, thank you, God. I now have my story without even half trying to write it. You just get out of the way and let it write itself. So yeah, I mean, I remember that one very, very well. And, like everyone else watching at home or watching there, you just had to shrug yourself.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And I mean, like, I think it was definitely cool also that they revisited Michael's time on the Dream Team with Scottie Pippen and all the rest last week. So, like, you have any interesting stories like that he told coming back, like from the Dream Team experience?
I remember more about Scotty coming back, and they were just exhausted. It was a hard act to follow after that, to get back into practice and to perform at that level. Scotty had ankle surgery in late August, which was sort of what he did later in his career, having surgery late. So he missed practice early on, which was kind of a thing with him, I think. Michael, you had to say whatever you could say about him. He didn't do that. He didn't sort of, miss practices. He didn't miss games, being sick. Phil was pretty sensitive with veteran players and with them giving them time off when they needed it. So theoretically, you didn't really need it. But yeah, we just kind of jumped right back in, and of course they were thrilled, but they were tired. They're very, very tired.
Yeah, they were, and also that's also the same year that Sam Smith's book comes out, The Jordan Rules, and we saw in the Last Dance the impact it had on the team, and Michael Jordan in particular was not very thrilled with it. Like, do you remember what the immediate fallout was like when that book came out and all of the reaction to it?
Yeah, it's funny because now Sam talks about how gracious Michael was in speaking to him, and I do remember that, but I definitely remember there being a lot of tension. And I remember, I took over the beat right after that. And, he was not happy with Sam at all. And it was a lot of, like I said, just awkwardness and tension walking into that beat at that point. And so it was, in some ways it was good because Sam, I think, kind of softened everybody up. And in later years, I would write a book and I would get good stuff, and they were always still very open with me. But on the other hand, I walked into an atmosphere that was fraught with some finger pointing and some, who was the source and that sort of thing. So it was a bit tense.
Yeah, for sure. And it was that whole, feel the end of that whole season was tense. We saw when we got to the '93 Eastern Conference Finals against the Knicks, which is still a sore memory for me. But I remember
Right.
yeah, it's not fun for me. The Charles Smith game is a whole ideal, but the big storyline coming out of that was Jordan's trip to Atlantic City after Game 2, after they lose and John Starks dunks on him, and there was a whole like scandal that came out. Everybody was like questioning his judgment there. So at the time, what was your reaction when you heard that he had gone down to Atlantic City after that loss?
To those of us who knew Michael, had been around him, it was a column in Dave Anderson. It was in Dave Anderson's column that he went, and sort of the uproar at that time was, oh my God, how would he stay up till 3:30 the day before a playoff game? And that part was sort of comical because we knew that this was a guy who played 72 holes of golf. I mean, that's not an exaggeration on days off between the playoff games. He was a guy that, later his father said, we stayed up every night watching movies until 3:30. He was a world-class athlete in his prime, the best basketball player, at the time. And, some say, and I would say the best of all time. And he sort of thrived off a little sickness, a little fatigue. So, and as far as the gambling, I know it was a scandal then, just like gambling. There was a certain seediness associated with gambling then and scandal that isn't as much now. That, granted, an athlete gambling still has that, the controversial tone to it for sure, but it was not something we were unused to. We knew that he bet on everything from, we saw pitching pennies to playing blackjack or poker on the plane. So again, like I think, we probably thought in Chicago that it was the New York media kind of, just, it was a very dramatic time and dramatic rivalry. And so, is every day was some huge story. And, that was New York's turn to sort of, just be up in arms and exalt over this, scandal that he had been in Atlantic City. But I'm not sure that those of us in the Chicago media thought it was as big a deal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, he wins the title. Then he goes through that summer, and then his father is killed over the summer. And then right before the 93-94 season, he announces he's retiring. So, like, how big a shock was it to the city, Chicago, at the time that Michael just walked away in the middle of his prime?
Yeah, it was for sure. I mean, I'm writing a blog for my website right now that, I had talked to him in Houston, and for whatever reason, I got him alone. I think the other two beat writers didn't make the trip, or I just got time with them. And it was in January, and the team was really struggling. They had lost to Orlando, and Michael had taken this 40-something shots. I want to say it was a career high at the time. I want to say it was 49. It was a crazy number of shots. And everybody was saying, well, there he goes again. He's taking over the team, and it's Jordan and the, extraordinaires or whatever they call them, Jordanaires. And so he was really pissed. And he said, I'm not going to be around forever. He started grumbling like that in January. I'm not sure. I know I didn't think that meant he really was going to retire. But later he told me that he had told his teammates that just watch, you're not going to have me around anymore. Like, he was just not having fun in practice. He didn't feel like his teammates, they were backbiting. They're doing things that championship teams do. Still in all, on that day, October 6th, the day of the press conference when he announced he was retiring in 1993, was an unbelievable shock. It was seconded only by when he said, I'm back, when he came back. No one really thought he'd go through with it. And I think about 5 seconds after the press conference started rumors of when he'd be back. So I don't think anybody was even accepting it. I think everybody was sort of in denial.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I'm sure they were also just as surprised to see him show up to play minor league baseball for the Birmingham Barons. So, like, was there
Right.
this air of disbelief within the Bulls fans? Like, why is he choosing to play minor league baseball and hit like 230 as opposed to being on the court winning titles for us?
I don't think anyone was ever mad at him. He just had his father murdered in horrific fashion. It was clear that he was having, issues that he had to deal with. I think people hoped he would be back. They had just won 3 titles, so it certainly wasn't a case of, this guy let us down. I mean, he was 30 years old. It was seemingly very premature for him to walk away. But I don't know that there was any resentment at that point. I think there was a great deal of fascination that, that he was playing baseball, and can he be that good, and what can he do? Can he possibly even come close to, to the kind of excitement, not talent certainly, but the kind of excitement he generated in basketball. So I think that was more than anything just intense interest.
Yeah, there was definitely interest there. There was also, people forget about that 93-94 Bulls team. It's the only one Jordan wasn't on in the middle of the run, and people forget that team was actually pretty good. Scottie Pippen led the team. They took the Knicks to the 7
Yeah.
games in the semifinals before falling there. So, like, what was like the tone of that whole season without Jordan there and Pippen being the leading man?
Well, I wrote a book on that season because it was so fascinating. One, it was called Transition Game, and it was the double entendre. Both the Bulls known for their transition from defense to offense. That's where their greatness sort of lied. But also Michael's transition out of basketball to baseball, and the Bulls' transition to surviving without him. And I guess that was a triple entendre. But Pippen had his greatest season arguably ever. He kind of found himself. He had some real low points, but his teammates loved him, and I believe he almost averaged a triple-double. He was arguably the league MVP. David Robinson won it, but I think Pippen's controversies off the court cost him that, because there was, of course, in Chicago they would think it, but a lot of people really thought he was cheated out of that MVP award. And whether he was or not, he had an unbelievable season, and the Bulls, no one ever expected them, to win 55 games and almost beat the Knicks. And, they could have, if not for a Hugh Hollins call, been in the conference championship against an Indiana team that they had their way with. And, then they'd be in the finals. I mean, that's, every team could say that, but they certainly were close.
Yeah, they were. And then they start the next year without him. And then we find out that basically, like, Michael Jordan decides, I'm not going to be used a pawn by the owners in baseball to basically be a scab player after the strikes. He announces, literally in epic fashion, he sends out a press release, 2 words, I'm back. Like, what was
Right.
the reaction to that? And, like, how excited were all the fans to see Michael Jordan come back?
Yeah. I mean, it was something that, like I said, was rumored and hoped for. And then, when he did it, it was just met with, with utter glee, because you just felt like, look, they were really good without him. They were, like I said, really pretty close. And the thought was, well, that's it. They're going to win another one. I think that was pretty much the feeling. And just to be able to sort of get an opportunity to watch him again was pretty crazy. So, he started out with the number 45 jersey, and Jerry Reinsdorf said he expected him to play another 3-4 years. And, Pippen was still there. So, yeah, it wasn't the same team. Paxson was gone, Bill Cartwright was gone, Horace Grant was gone, but they had Tony Kukoc, and so that was going to be fun. And Steve Kerr joined the team. So, and he was excited, Michael. He was definitely, he kept the door open all that time. It was 18 months that he was out of the game, and he had said sort of never say never. But he also kept saying, and Phil Jackson kept saying, but I never really thought it was going to happen. And then here he was. So it was, and he looked great. He looked like he could, maybe his legs were even stronger. And he was not afraid of tainting his image, which people kind of said. And he had been also rumored and indeed had been playing with the team, had been practicing with the team. So, I'm just looking at the stories I'm talking to. I mean, President Clinton issued a statement. It's great for Chicago. It's great for Illinois. It's great for basketball. Mayor Daley, the Chicago mayor at that time. It was major, major news.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone was thrilled, but the thing that was always striking me looking back there, including like me as a Knicks fan, again, the double nickel game, the fact that Jordan is wearing 45. So, like, did that, like, just feel, like, odd? Like, yes, he's here, but, like, it's not the same Jordan that we've seen before?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't. It took him a little while to get into the, he could be forgiven for that, but I think it was 16 games maybe, or 19 games at most, until the playoffs. And definitely he was not quite the same. And then to see him in 45 was really surreal. I remember I was a little mini scoop of mine. I saw the equipment manager actually sewing on his number 45 onto his uniform. And, in those days, obviously, we didn't have social media. So to wait till the next morning. And I think my editor didn't really believe me, because that would be really embarrassing if that wasn't true. And so it was kind of a little box story that Michael was coming back as number 45. And of course, there's the rush to stores to buy number 45 jersey. And he didn't stay in that for long. But yeah, it was crazy. I think at the time, I could be wrong, that he said his father had, part of his emotion in retiring was he didn't want his father to, he wanted his father to have seen every single game he played. So when he came back, it's like, well, my father saw every single game I played in number 23. So he was going to start. That was kind of how I think he reconciled it in his own mind. And then, clearly that just wasn't working for him. So he became number 23 again.
Yeah, I know I know that changed, like, in the playoffs when they were playing Orlando in the second round, and like he gets beat up in game 1 or 2, and Nick Anderson, I think, says for the Magic, said, I have no idea who 45 is. That's not Michael Jordan. Then he changes the jersey back. But, like, what was the tone for the team when they go through that series with the Magic? And that's the last playoff loss Jordan has his entire career.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think he just wasn't ready, at that time, and it was weird. It was awkward. It was. I do remember, just seeing him on a court in a playoff and the Bulls losing. I don't remember every detail of that game, but was surreal in itself, But I think there's so much hope about them just coming back and kind of bouncing back. And then sure enough, Krause gets Rodman, and, it was clear that, it wasn't it wasn't going to be very long before he got back into form and the Bulls got back into form.
Yeah, indeed. This is my last question for you. Is really like one thing I've really been curious about is like being around Phil Jackson on a day-to-day basis because everybody knows like he's sort of like out there. He does have his own like philosophies on things. What was it like being around Phil on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the joke was, what are you writing today? And it'd be like whatever Phil says, because he was also a blessing for any writer. He was so insightful, and we kind of mocked him a bit because he'd say, "Oh, he's a deep thinker." I think he called himself a deep thinker once. It's kind of when someone calls themselves one, you kind of chuckle a little bit, but he was, he was. I mean, who else is lighting, incense in team meetings and giving his players books and celebrating Casimir Pulaski Day, by explaining Chicago history to his team and having talks about gun control. And, not all of that got out at the time, but certainly he always had something really interesting to say. And, I found him to be great to work with as a young writer. I felt like I was being educated by him and by Tex Winter and Johnny Bach, his assistants, who were terrific. So, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed Phil. I thought he was funny. He had a dry sense of humor. He would make fun of some of his players at times. He would protect them at other times, but he was never boring.
Yeah, he never was boring. Melissa Isaacson, thank you for all the time today. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, do you want to let people know how to follow you on social media and keep up with some of the stuff you're up to and some of the stuff you've written?
Well, on Twitter, it's at MK Isaacson, and my website is melissaisaacson.com. So people can read the prologue of my relatively new book called State, about my 1979 state championship girls basketball team, one of the first teams in Illinois. We beat Jackie Joyner's team, and kind of a coming of age story about the first generation of girls post Title IX. So the prologue is there, and I write a lot about the Bulls. So yeah, anybody can certainly visit that. Would be great.
All right, thanks again for taking time. I really appreciate it.
Sure, Mike. Thank you.
All right, and there you have it. That was Melissa Isaacson recounting some memories from the mid-90s Chicago Bulls. Some very fun stuff there, and definitely worth looking at as you want to go back and want to rewatch some of the episodes of The Last Dance with this information. It's a much more interesting context. And speaking of The Last Dance, we're going to recap episodes 7 and 8 with Dandy Martini and Phil Lombardo right after this.